Hello and welcome. You're watching this edition of the CNBC Africa Conversation. I'm Godfrey Mutizwa. What do you call a man who has published 24 books, written 500 articles that have been peer-reviewed, and has supervised more than 40 PhD students? An academic or an intellectual? But is that enough? Let's discover him. What makes him? Please help me welcome Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, the outgoing Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg and incoming Rector of the United Nations University in Japan. Before we dig deep into you, I wanted to talk about a question that most South Africans, and I think I would go so far as to say Africans that have heard about your appointment to the United Nations University in Tokyo, have asked and struggled with. We celebrate your appointment to go to such an august body. At the same time, we are crying because now we are losing such a powerful intellectual from our midst. So what do? Do we celebrate? Do we cry? What about yourself? Are you as conflicted?
No, I'm not as conflicted. I actually believe that in order to take care of the interest of the African continent, we need to be in all strategic centers of power. And the United Nations is such strategic center of power that is working for the greater good of everybody. Does not have national interest. It has the interests of the world as an entity. So I don't think it's an issue to worry about. I am also leaving the University of Johannesburg in very, very good shape.
Yeah.
It is now the second best university in the African continent according to QS rankings. It's a much, much more wealthier university with reserves of almost 5 billion rands. They were just under 1 billion rands when I took over, with the largest research production by any other university in South Africa, and a host of capable leaders who are going to be able to take this university to greater heights. So I am living with a big smile.
Sure. And then I'll take the question down a little further and say, some would then argue that such work, such diligence, and such results could perhaps have been expanded onto the national level. And South Africa, given its dire, difficult situation, could well have been the beneficiary of such.
No, absolutely. I'll give you an example. Let's look at the National Research Foundation. Excellent leader. He was my PhD student. We look at the person who is doing natural language processing, maybe the leader in the area in South Africa, Professor Marwala, the APSA chair at University of Pretoria, was my student. So when I decided to become an academic, I used to work for South Africa for a brewery. I became an academic because I wanted to be a fisher of men, of people, rather than a maker of beer.
Yeah.
So I think I have left a good foundation and a good people in strategic positions to be able to take this society forward.
What have your friends been saying to you? What has family been saying to you? You were telling me earlier about your mother's retort.
My mother said to me, go on and serve the world and positively change it for the better. Sure. And I think that is very important because changing the world is not difficult. We have villains who have changed the world. What needs to happen is that the world has to be changed in a positive way. We have to leave the greatest amount of people at the greatest level of happiness as much as possible. That is our role, to improve the world.
And you're going to try and see which way you can improve the world. And
Absolutely.
improve the world you must, because you are taking on an international role, not just any international role, a huge one. Because when I was reading through some of the writings that have been made about you, I was made aware that I should actually now be addressing you as under United Nations Under Secretary General. It is a position that comes with the position that you are taking. You are taking on an institution that is in 12 countries around the world, 13 campuses around the world. Let's talk about the scale of the challenge.
Well, I mean, I must also first say that I am prepared for that scale because, as you know, the University of Johannesburg is one of the largest universities in the world. 50,000 students, 8,000 full-time and part-time staff members. Now 6 campuses, you know. So I am used to managing complexity with students from 80 different countries.
Sure.
So I am well placed to be able to handle the United Nations. Now let's talk about the role itself.
Yes.
It's really about how do you advance sustainable development goals. Whether it is the issue of reduction of poverty, whether it is the issue of equality, gender equality, reduction, elimination of racism, whether it is the issue of sustainability in terms of water and sanitation and energy, and in South Africa we know too well the importance of that.
Yes.
And of course, here at the University of Johannesburg, during my tenure, we took our dependency on fossil fuel from 100% to now 87%, because 13% of our power at the University of Johannesburg is solar.
Sure.
And of course, that is going to be very important going forward. Is the issue about innovation, infrastructure, and industrialization. And we know too well in South Africa, because we have deindustrialized, because we have lost our competitive edge. How do we build systems that are not only going to favor one region of the world in terms of industrialization, but it is going to favor all of us? It can only be done at the United Nations.
Sure.
The issue of responsible consumption and production, very, very important. It's not just consuming things. It's also about making sure that the things we consume are renewable, making sure that climate change is at the front of our minds in all aspects of our lives, mobilizing global solidarity so that we can be able to tackle some of these problems that we face.
So on a day-to-day basis, what do you do? Do you teach students? Do you manage people? As editor of the channel, one of the things I've discovered is that a lot of your time is actually spent in managing people rather than actually looking and breaking news.
Look, I mean, I think being a rector or vice chancellor is a combination of all those things.
Sure.
You have to manage people.
You have to manage people.
And in my case now, is 60,000 people that I have to look after, you know.
Sure.
And it means the environment in which they are must be safe. It means they have to be treated well. It means you must have systems to correct. So it's actually quite complex.
Yeah.
Then the second role is to educate society.
Right.
You know, just last week I was reading a book which I read with staff and students to increase literacy. Scientific literacy is now a human right issue.
Sure.
If you cannot use devices such as smartphones because you are not technologically literate, then your human rights can be undermined. So it is our responsibility to ensure that no one is left behind.
Sure.
That we go into those villages and ensure that the people know how to use devices, and we go out into political spaces to ensure that people have access to devices and they have access to data so that they can be able to bridge this digital divide, which is another issue that is very, very important in the next role that I'm
But in you taking up this position, do we lose the scholar?
No,
we
absolutely not. You don't lose the scholar. In fact, you globalize the scholar.
Okay. Okay. The scholar will continue to teach, to learn, to grow, to share.
Certainly all those, but certainly not in the normal way of teaching. I have not done that for a very, very long time, more than 10 years. But teaching in the sense that you are educating. You are educating, you are going to conferences and you are presenting. You are presenting to communities, you are presenting to lawmakers so that they can go out there and change the world for the better.
Let me speak about something that as a young man growing up, I always wondered about. We saw Kofi Annan appointed United Nations Secretary General. As Africans, we celebrated And yet, when you think about it, through the years, issues that concern Africa, we did not change fundamentally. I.e., while we had an African at the helm, I don't know that we got the voice that we wanted. And I got the same sense again when we got the United Nations, the World Trade Organization Director General. She went in, but I don't know that African affairs are going to become. So my question to you is, when you take over, does it mean that issues that concern Africa are finally going to be heard and you'll be able to shape the debate so that we become participants rather than just people whose ideas are thrown in the bin, and we finally get to hear an African voice driving the issues that concern the world?
No, absolutely. We come from the global south, and many of the challenges that we are facing, the problems of poverty, the problems of inequality, the problems of gender, gender-based violence, and so on and so forth, afflict people in the global south, and many of those problems even more,
Sure.
Now the question is it not beneficial to have somebody from the global south?
It should have happened a long time ago.
Absolutely. Now it has happened for the first time now. At the United Nations University, we're going to have a person from the global south.
Yeah.
And the issues that affect the African continent are obviously going to be at the top of my mind. And they are going to be at the top of my mind, not necessarily because I'm African, because not only do they affect Africa, but by extension, they affect the rest of the world.
True.
If we don't deal with issues of poverty, we know what happens to the problem of migration.
For sure.
People trying to cross to Europe, for example. So all these issues are interconnected, and we need to have a global view that is as representative as possible, with voices from every part of the world around the table, so that we can be able to advance this. And some of those voices must also be at the top.
Sure.
And what we are saying is that it has never happened in this institution that such voice would be at the highest level of that institution. So I am quite looking forward to adding that voice from the global south.
I really like it. I really like the fact that you are going in to shape ideas, because often we get lost with the today's power rather than the things that shape what the future ought to be. So I am celebrating. But I want to know.
But I also have to add that while we think of the future, we should not lose sight that there are problems now.
True.
That have to be solved now.
True.
The problems of interstate conflict cannot be postponed to the future. It has to be solved now. The problem of food security, energy security, environmental security is a problem of the future, but it's also the problem of the present, and it has to be solved now. And if we're lucky, we can tackle it and it becomes the thing of the past. And much more likely, we will have to solve it into the future, because these are just complicated problems.
Sounds to me like you are talking to your agenda, because that was going to be my next question. I imagine now you are thinking, you are connecting with people, you are sharing ideas. I'm wondering what your agenda will be like.
Well, my agenda is very, very simple. I would like to connect universities in the global south with universities in the global north to tackle some of the biggest challenges that are facing the world.
That's interesting, because your friend, the founder of our channel, of course, Mr. Rakesh Wahi, is exactly doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have worked with Mr. Rakesh for a long time, and I will continue to work with Mr. Rakesh. The other thing is the issue of access to education. We know that, especially in the developed South, that we are not going to be able to build enough brick and mortar institutions to be able to educate all the people. Now, the question that we need to ask ourselves is that, is there a third way? And there is. Digital tools, online learning, where we can be able to get world-class teachers teaching in our rural areas, where if we had to rely on a physical human being going to those villages, we are going to be waiting for 50 years and we will still not have such people.
True.
That's another thing that I'd like to put on the agenda. And then the third thing that I really would like to put on the agenda is this issue of the future. Artificial intelligence, an area where
Your baby.
An area where I did a PhD at Cambridge. I've written many books on the subject.
Yeah.
How do we make it inclusive?
I'm scared of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what some of the thinkers are saying, they are saying that if we do not understand it well, it is going to exacerbate global inequality. If we do not handle it well, it will be misused and it will discriminate against digital minorities.
Yeah.
If we don't handle it well, it is going to disrupt the future of work so badly that social cohesion is going to be challenged
100%.
in many different countries, leading to conflicts. If we don't handle it well, it is going to be weaponized and used to destroy people. And we need people who are thinking about these things. And thinking is good, but it's not enough. But also putting mechanisms to make sure that the deployment of this very powerful technology is as responsible as possible.
And you're saying it's possible to make artificial intelligence a force for good?
Absolutely, absolutely. Technology can be used for bad, it can be used for good.
Sure.
Nuclear technology, it can be used to make nuclear bomb, but it can also be used to create energy. Now the question that we need to do as responsible people is to make sure that this powerful technology that is at our disposal is used for good and is never used for bad. But people are always going to have bad people who are going to use it for that. What mechanisms do we use, we put into place? What regulatory mechanisms do we put into place so that we control and limit and hopefully eliminate the use of this technology for the bad?
Absolutely. And I think all of us will be cheering for you as you get there. But I wanted to go back a little bit and ask the question, how did the boy from Tutuni, down in Makato, Toya, Handul, Limpopo, end up as a scholar? When you were growing up, because I read up on you, you went to school barefoot, like I did, like millions of Africans did. You were under a tree when you began your first lessons. How did you get into academia?
Well, I must also confess that Africa is full of talented people in villages.
Sorry, I'm laughing, but I shouldn't be laughing.
Yeah, it's full of talented people in the villages. The responsibility of responsible leadership is to create mechanisms of identifying such talent, nurturing it, and releasing it for the benefit of the world.
Yeah.
And in many ways we have failed as a continent, and in many ways we have succeeded.
True.
And we need to learn from our failures, and we need to consolidate on our successes.
Yeah.
I was surrounded by great teachers. My grandmother, my first engineering teacher, could not read or write.
Who was your first engineering teacher?
My grandmother.
Tell me.
But she would make clay pots.
Ah.
And going to look for clay to make clay pots, in engineering we call that material selection. Making clay pot itself, shaping it. Obviously now you might do it using computer-aided design. We call that design. Putting it in the sun so that it can dry is science. It's thermodynamics.
Sure.
Putting it in the fire so that you can harden it is an annealing process when you cool it down.
Sure.
Something that we learn in physics. Testing it whether it is in good condition or not, and my grandmother will do that by knocking the pot and listening to the sound, is called non-destructive testing. So I grew up with people who are absolutely educated. They might not be educated in the modern
sense that we know today.
And I must also add that we need to formalize that education We need to formalize that education. We need to get as many of our people into formal education as possible, for the simple reason that it has collected huge amounts of archives of information on how to do things that can potentially improve our lives.
Absolutely. You know, if I say today that Robert Mugabe was a good man in some way, some people will laugh at me. But I look back at the example of Zimbabwe. I can look back at my own example as well. When we were growing up, you aspired to be better than where you were, but most of us ended up in the commercial farming areas. And so poverty was entrenched. You grow up, you work in the fields, you then graduate to become a senior worker there, and you die, and the circle is unbroken. Mugabe broke that circle by providing free education. How was it in your case?
Well, I mean, I have been a beneficiary of many scholarships. When I went to study for my undergraduate degree in engineering in the United States, it was all paid for by scholarships. When I went to University of Pretoria to do a master's degree, it was all paid for. When I went to University of Cambridge to do a PhD, it was also paid for. And I think I was lucky. But what we need to do as a society is not to cater for that one student who is lucky. We need to democratize access to good education. We need to democratize that access because to release productive forces that are going to grow our economies and make our economies much more competitive, we will need to educate people in their multitudes.
I'm asking a silly question. Can we afford it?
Absolutely. What we can't afford is not to educate the people. If you do not educate your population, you have a big problem in front of you that you will not be able to solve in a single generation. It will, if you once you start solving it, it will take several education. Education is always a good investment. Not educating your population is a bad investment. In fact, it is destructive. You are destroying your capacity to solve some of the biggest challenges.
But where did South Africa go wrong? Because you look at the numbers. In per capita terms, South Africa spends more on education than some of the most developed countries in the world, including Germany, including the United States.
I think what has happened is that we think that education only happens at school. I've already indicated that a great deal of education, I got it from my grandmother. Those communities where if you don't go to school, your neighbor will be the first one to come to your parents and say, I saw your son lingering around the street. Why wasn't he at school? You know, to enforce accountability, to enforce children going to school. We need to bring those systems back. Secondly, this migration of people who are doing well in our communities to suburbs, to urban areas, is depriving our young people of role models, positive role models. You go to our townships and you ask some of these young kids, is there anybody around you that you see as a role model? Of course, there will be people they see as role models. Sometimes they are not the right people, they are not the right role models. But we have to be there in our communities. We have to be there in our communities to serve as positive role models. And thirdly, we need to make our educators accountable. We know that not all teachers are in the classrooms. We know about absenteeism on Mondays. We need to ensure that our people are doing what they are supposed to do in our schools. Our teachers come to school on time, because if they don't, you are creating a society that is not going to respect time. It's not going to respect laws. In fact, one wise man once said, if you want to see the character of any nation,
Yeah.
you have to go and look at the character of its teachers.
Sure. Prof, as you leave, the detractors will say you are joining those who are going to other places because South Africa is failing, because Africa is failing. I wanted some final words from you, your thoughts in respect to the future of this country and, by extension, the continent.
You know, I've been reading about how I will be addressed at the United Nations. And I realized that when I'm there, they will always say, Tshilidzi Marwala of South Africa. So this is not like I am going to another country. I'm going to work for the world. Now, in terms of, are we failing as a country? I think there are certain things that we could have done better. That is obvious. I think we could have made much more progress on education than we have made. I think we could have given more houses to people than we have done. But that system has not been completely efficient. But there are some good signs. There are some good things that we have done. I still remember the first person in my village to get a university degree. And he's not even an old man. I was talking to him the other day, you know. And now when you go there, you realize that you have hundreds of people who have gotten a good education. I still remember as a young man going to an old person's house and writing for them. Normally letters that are supposed to be for adults.
Yeah.
Because in the family there was nobody who could read and write.
Sure.
And if you go and check now, the literacy is
so
high.
you are not despondent?
Absolutely not. We have to fix. Let's not be complacent.
Yeah.
We have to fix a lot of things. We have to fix governance. We have to reduce corruption. We have to elevate the role of education as the biggest transformational agent that is going to take our people from poverty to prosperity. And I think if we do all those things, we are going to succeed.
Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching this edition of In Conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I did. I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.
I don't think